Let's talk about the geopolitical risk and more with Helima Croft, head of global commodity research at RBC Capital Markets, and a CNBC contributor. Helima, as you probably know, talks in Geneva just ended moments ago, but Axios earlier today reporting that White House advisors Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were not happy with what they heard from Iran today. The evening session, again, just ended. What do you see as some of the high probability potential outcomes?
I mean, Brian, if the United States sticks with a zero enrichment demand, I don't see how we avoid military action. The question is there some narrow pathway whereby which Iran comes out and says that they will not have a nuclear weapon, that they agree to suspend all enrichment? Like, is there a way that we can bridge this divide? But again, I don't think the Iranians are going to give up the right to enrich domestically. And we think, that's the make or break issue. There were some reports today that the United States was demanding the complete destruction of the Natanz facility, the Fordow enrichment facility, the Isfahan reactor. Like, that is something, again, we just don't see the Iranians agreeing to that. So talks are set to resume in Vienna next week. But remember, Brian, in June, we had talks going up to the moment the Israeli jets started pounding Iran. So I don't think we should take the continuation remarks as an indication that we are pulling back from a military confrontation.
No, and Iran recently massacring, not too strong of a word, thousands or over 10,000 of its own people who were protesting. But I hate to be cold about it, but we're talking energy. Is there a chance that if the U.S. does strike Iran, that it would hit any of the oil facilities? Or would it strictly target military and nuclear targets because, number one, Iran itself, the Iranian people are not the problem. They would need the oil revenue to rebuild their country. Number two, this is a president, President Trump, who does not want to see a spike in gasoline prices.
100%. President Trump does not want $100 oil. So I don't think Karg Island, for example, which is the central point of failure for the entire Iranian oil export system, I don't think Karg Island would probably be on the initial list. The real question, Brian, is that the United States does a strike on Iran, even if it's a limited strike, do the Iranians seek to retaliate using their missile capabilities, using their small boats from their facilities along the Strait of Hormuz? Do they target tankers? Do they target regional energy infrastructure to raise the economic costs for Washington of engaging in another confrontation?
And Helima, as we have waited, we've bought the rumor, we've sold the rumor, we're not sure what to do with the rumor, we're not sure what to do with the fact here, right? And what might a response look like? And is this like many of these more short-term operations that we've seen, or is this going to accidentally turn into something more drawn out or intentionally turn into something more drawn out?
I mean, Kelly, I think your point is so interesting because we've never had such a large military buildup targeting an adversary and have stood down. And so the question is there almost a fog of war risk as well? Like, do the Iranians misread our intentions because we have such a large military buildup? So I do think the question about could the United States do a limited strike in this environment and contain the fallout regionally, I think that would be challenging, especially given what happened in Venezuela. We did execute a regime change operation in Venezuela. Will the Iranians believe that any U.S. military action or action with the Israelis would inevitably be a regime change operation? So again, in this current climate, the question is, would a limited strike by the United States remain within the borders of Iran? I think that could be really challenging given what transpired in Venezuela and given the size of this buildup in the Middle East. Again, maybe there is some rabbit pulled out of the hat in terms of negotiations. But if we don't see movement on this enrichment issue, I think everyone in the market should prepare for a military confrontation.
And we've seen bullish bets in oil soar. In fact, there's some people that have $100 calls on a barrel of oil. Those are far out of the money, by the way, for now. We'll see. I know you talk to everybody, Helima, all the time. If something were to happen with oil output and exports from Iran, would the Saudis and or UAE and or others have the ability and the incentive to add more oil to the market?
I mean, Brian, this is the great question because we are heading into an OPEC meeting over the weekend. So the question is, do we see more barrels returning to the market in advance of this? I would just say that if you look at spare capacity, it is sitting in Saudi Arabia at the moment. We do not have a lot of spare barrels outside of Saudi Arabia. This is really a Saudi spare capacity story. And you have had officials say that the run up that we saw in '08, in terms of that run up to 148, was driven in part by fears of little spare capacity. So every time the White House asks OPEC to put more barrels on the market, you have fewer in reserve in the event of a supply disruption.